I'm not going. My mom, always a measured and level-headed presence in my life, calmly turned to me and asked, "Why?" I wasn't getting any sleep. My parents and I were not seeing eye to eye around my college decision. And over the previous year, my family had experienced a jarring amount of loss. And so with bags under my eyes, I indignantly declared, "Well, because I don't need it. I'm totally fine." The way she looked back at me said it all. She knew that I knew that I needed it. But as all thoughtful and mature teenage boys do, I doubled down. "Maybe you need to see a therapist, but I'm totally good. There's nothing wrong with me." I only went once and haven't admitted it to her until this very moment, but it did a whole lot. A period of tension between myself and my parents found some healing and resolve. I finally started to get some sleep, and when it was all said and done, I was headed to my dream school. And ironically, almost 13 years later to the day, I married Zazu, my beshert, a therapist. I didn't know it at the time, but moments like this one were ultimately part of my growth as a person and as a young man. Throughout my years in rabbinical school, I have been deeply immersed in the question, what is healthy masculinity and what does it mean to foster it? I imagine my teenage self would have bristled at this question, similarly to the way I did at my mother's suggestion that I see a therapist. However, I have since spent much time exploring this topic as it relates to myself, to raising young boys and men in our communities, and as it impacts all of us, people of all genders, who are our fullest selves when we have an entire spectrum of masculinity and femininity at our disposal to realize whole and true expressions of our creation and beauty, B'Tselem Elohim, in the eyes and the image of God. While this may be a theology that we aspire to, can the Torah, a text critiqued for its patriarchal agenda, really serve us in developing an expanded vision of healthy masculinity? In the opening of Parashat Chayei Sarah, we immediately learn of Sarah's passing. After Abraham secures a burial plot for Sarah, he turns his attention to finding a wife for his son, Yitzchak. A traditional read of this story offers the woman, who we will soon know as Rivka, as a replacement for or an heir to Sarah and her legacy. In our introduction to Rivka, she initially seems to play an ancillary role, often occupied by women in the Tanakh. When Abraham sends his servant Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak, he implies that a woman need not be a key decision maker or even a participant in the formation of marriage. The text tells us of Rivka's value as a beautiful woman and the merit of her virginal status. However, if we spend some time exposing more layers of the text, we arrive at a much more dynamic characterization of Rivka. While the text is brief in describing how Rivka drew for all of Eliezer's camels, we know that he's brought 10 of them. A desert animal known to feed intermittently, when camels do consume, they drink up to 20 gallons of water. So while Eliezer sits idly and observes her, Rivka performs an incredible act of physical strength as she carries 200 gallons of water to feed the camels. After Rivka offers Eliezer a place to stay at her family home, he then asks for her hand in marriage on behalf of his master, Yitzchak, though the decision is ultimately left in her hands. However, the next morning, when they are set to leave, Rivka's family requests that she stay with them for another 10 days. Eliezer is insistent that they begin their journey home to Yitzchak. The decision is again left with Rivka, who announces, Elech, I will go. We learned from my teacher, Rabbi Dr. Amy Kalmanovsky, that as Rivka proclaims Elech, we are reminded of the language that God used with Abraham, Lech Lecha. Just as Abraham, before her journey through that desert path and set out for Canaan, Rivka too takes a step into the unknown. My teacher, Dr. Rachel Rosenthal, writes, far from being a simple tool in her husband's pursuit of his fate, Rivka has a crucial role. Inheritor of not Sarah, but Avraham, an institutor of her own vision. She teaches us to look beyond set roles and expectations and instead see beneath the surface. If Rivka's actions jump out at us for the ways that they are powerful and demand our attention, then Yitzchak's role, notably his absence throughout the narrative, is also strikingly conspicuous. His mother has died and been buried. His father is working to find him a life partner. And for the first 81 verses of our parashah, he is nowhere to be seen. Yitzchak seems to be weak, uninvolved, or uninterested in his own fate. And instead of journeying on his own, he has his father and Eliezer taking the reins over his life. A fuller picture of Yitzchak also requires that we take a step back. The last that we read of Yitzchak at the end of the previous parashah, he is returning from Mount Moriah, where his father has just attempted to kill him as an offering to God. Our Midrash tells us that in the aftermath of the Akedah, Sarah dies of a broken heart. And the repercussions don't stop there. Avraham and God never speak again. Avraham and Yitzchak never interact again. If we go further into Yitzchak's past, we are reminded that Yitzchak has lost his older brother when he was just a little boy. Yitzchak has suffered through one painful loss after another, and to this point has had little by means of support or comfort offered to him. That he is still present and in relationship with his family at all is a sign of his will, strength, and willingness to grow and to heal. So I return to the question, what is healthy masculinity, and what does it mean to foster it? As I have sought and embraced a theology that unlocks a vision of Torah inclusive of a broader vision of masculinity, I've also confronted the ways that my upbringing as a boy in the Jewish community did not always provide this nuance or this expansiveness. As evidenced by my opening anecdote, unlike Yitzchak, in the face of all that I was going through as a teenage boy, I was not silent. I was loud, and I was angry, and I was not so graceful. In expressing my discontent to anyone who would listen. I struggled to find answers, put undue burden on several women in my life, and was lucky to find a bit of solace in the comfort of a few of my closest friends, who at that age and stage were boys mostly unable or unready to hold my pain or conflict. In the Women's Torah commentary, Rabbi Rona Shapiro elaborates on Sarah's death by way of a broken heart. She cites feminist psychologist and ethicist Carol Gilligan, who explains that women not only define themselves in a context of human relationship, but also judge themselves in terms of their ability to care. Women's place in man's life cycle has been that of nurturer, caretaker, and helpmate, the weaver of those networks of relationships on which she in turn relies. But while women have taken care of men, men have tended to devalue that care. Men have tended to devalue that care. And I'm not here today to assert that all men do this, or further any stereotypes or gender binaries. However, I am acutely aware from my learning and lived experience that the ills of patriarchy have played a significant role in bringing immense pain to trans and cis women, non-binary people, and those all along the gender spectrum, trans men and cis men as well. As such, it is essential that men and boys understand their stake in the project of collective liberation, because when we're in pain, we inevitably end up hurting the people around us. This past September, I was lucky to participate in a moving traditions training led by Rabbi Daniel Graber. An organization committed to nurturing well-being among Jewish youth, I was there to learn how to facilitate a group dedicated to fostering healthy masculinity for teenagers. In our sessions together, we discussed the reality that men, like all humans, have a deep need for connection, love, and support. But from the moment of birth, many boys in our society are systematically denied or have diminished access to closeness, tenderness, intimacy, and expressions of loneliness or grief. From a young age, boys are trained to separate from their feelings, and yet it is emotions, especially vulnerable ones, that allow us to not only bond with others, but to find a felt sense of warmth, security, trust, and protection. It is vulnerable emotion that equals connection. With these words, Rabbi Graber opened a new theological lens for me through which to read the story of Rivka and Yitzchak. If to this point, Yitzchak and Rivka have lived lives that do offer us a healthy subversion of the patriarchal expectations of their gender roles, what will we discover in them when they finally come to meet each other? After we hear Rivka declare, Elech, I will go, she begins her journey back to the land of Canaan. As she is set to arrive, but before she sees Yitzchak for the first time, Yitzchak is finally brought back into the narrative. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. And Isaac went out and lasuacht in the field. My teacher, Dr. Jason Rogoff, points out that in one of the few moments we actually read of Yitzchak performing an action, the verb describing this action, lasuach, is ambiguous in meaning. He brings together several commentators who together paint a clear picture of this phrase. Ibn Ezra puts forth an interpretation that Yitzchak was out for a walk. The Ramban, however, is more partial to the shorish sicha, to have a conversation. In his reading, Yitzchak was out in the field, talking with his friends. After all that he's been through, Yitzchak has taken time and space away and has finally found comfort and even healing through conversation, company, and intimacy. It is only at this moment that Rivka and Yitzchak finally meet. We read, Yitzchak then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rivka as his wife. Yitzchak loved her, and thus found comfort after his mother's death. In Ellen Frankel's The 5 Books of Miriam, she asserts that after all the pain he has endured from his father and even his mother, it is only when Yitzchak marries Rivka that he discovers the power of love as an agent for healing. But Yitzchak does more than just find someone else to hold and take care of him in place of his mother. It is because of the time spent with his chevra in the fields, an experience where he has found healthy expression of self in the wake of family division and violence, that we are able to witness Yitzchak show up in his relationship with Rivka from a place of not only love, but mutual care and support. As Rivka is initially unable to conceive, we read at the beginning of Parashat Toldot, Vayetar Yitzchak l'Adonai lenochach ishto. And Isaac pleaded with God in the presence of his wife. In Hagit Rappel's Midrash, in the book of Dirshuni, she explores what is underneath the phrase lenochach ishto, not on behalf of his wife, but in the presence of his wife. Only after Yitzchak stands before her, in her presence, are the two of them able to see one another fully, inclusive of all of their suffering and all of their flaws. And it's at this moment that God is able to answer their prayers. The change that takes place is not in God, but in Yitzchak and in Rivka. Their ability to see the other, to be vulnerable, and to express empathy are what make Rivka's pregnancy possible. In this moment, a complete picture of Rivka and Yitzchak comes into focus. Rivka is a trailblazer. She is physically and emotionally strong, able to both leave her family and also comfort Yitzchak in his grief, and assumes the more dominant role in her relationship and generation. Yitzchak is also strong. Through softness and quiet reflection, he finds hope, meaning, and connection in a life that has been filled with pain, hurt, and disappointment. But more importantly, where he watched his father hurt his mother in leaving her out of the conversation about their son's fate, Yitzchak brings Rivka in to their dialogue with God and sees her as his partner in the fullest sense of the word. It is with all of this in mind that we read of Yitzchak's expression of love for Rivka, the only one of its kind in the Torah, to be demonstrative of what we can hope to achieve. In Rivka, we see someone with the ability to take risks, be self-sufficient, and assert agency. In Yitzchak, we see someone who is caring, thoughtful, and who works towards growth and healing instead of relying on denial, anger, or resentment. In their stories, I see an invitation for myself as a young man and for all of us to step into and live out all of these qualities. And in their coming together, we see a way to transcend the particularities of any single embodied expression. They model a fullness of being to work toward in any relationship, romantic or platonic, hetero or queer, with another or with ourselves. May each of us be blessed to be like both Yitzchak and Rivka. In doing so, may we step into and live out a Torah that shines a light on each of us as the dynamic and full and holy individuals we are. B'Tselem Elohim. I want to briefly express my immense gratitude to my parents who flew out today to be here. I know I was not always easy, but my standing here today is in so many ways a tribute to the unconditional love you've given me my entire life. Zazu, I'm so blessed to call you my partner in the fullest sense of the word, and I feel such overwhelming awe and wonder to journey through life with you by my side. To my teachers and my mentors, I would not have what to say if it was not for your love, guidance, and meaningful Torah, and the extent of my appreciation is impossible to express. I'd specifically like to thank Rabbi Barry Dov Katz for his feedback and Rabbi Michal Springer for patiently working with me and mentoring me in writing this Devar Torah. To my classmates, you have been my chevra with whom I've been able to lasuach. You are my confidence, my role models, my dear, dear friends, and my rabbis. Finally, I'd like to dedicate my words today to my grandparents. My grandmother Evelyn, who fled from Nazi-occupied Poland, and my grandmother Edith, a survivor of Auschwitz. My grandfather Jack, a World War II veteran, and my grandfather Martin, who both fled Poland and then fought in the war as well. They each showed me what it meant to show up for a partner, to take journeys, to persevere in the face of tragedy, and to love one another with humility and compassion. I'm so proud to be your grandson. After Kaddish Rabbanan, I invite you to please come join me for an oneg. I promise I'm very happy to be here. I really, really am. I'd love to get to thank you more directly and share a l'chaim. I ask you to rise for Kaddish Rabbanan. Yitzgadal v'yitzgadash shemei rabbah. Be'alma divrach hiruteh ve'amlich malchuteh. B'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala ubizman kariv ve'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevorach le'olam ulmei olmaya. Yitzbarach v'yishtabach v'yitzba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal. Shemei d'kudesha brichu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Al Yisrael ve'al Rabbanan ve'al Talmidehon ve'al kol Talmidei Talmidehon ve'al kol man de'askin be'oraita di ve'atra haden ve'di ve'chol atar ve'atar yehei lahon ulchon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin umzona revicha u'forkana min kodom v'hon de'vishemaya v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim tovim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru. Amen. Thank you.
Let's go!